Every trooper who ever worked the road in eastern Kentucky knows that the mountains aren't just scenery. They are a presence. They dictate how you live, how you work, and especially how you drive. And if you wore the gray uniform in Letcher County, there was one particular stretch of asphalt that served as the ultimate proving ground: Pine Mountain. To the tourists, it's a beautiful scenic ridge. To us, it was a measuring stick. It was the unofficial leaderboard we kept in our heads. Troopers would swap stories over a cup of gas station coffee, comparing driving abilities based on one simple metric. I made it from point A to point B across the mountain in X number of minutes. I was confident in my skills, and I knew every curve, every dip, and every unforgiving switchback of that mountain like the back of my hand. But there's a difference pushing a cruiser to the limit for the clock and pushing it because a brother might be in a fight for his life. It was an evening patrol shift. The sun was dipping below the ridges, and the shadows were getting long in the hollers. I was cruising along, listening to my radio, when a call came through dispatch for Trooper Combs. It was a domestic dispute, dispatched to the Eola area of Letcher County. Now, geography is everything out here. I was completely on the other side of Pine Mountain at the time. David was closer. But in the mountains, closer is a relative term. A domestic call is always unpredictable, always high voltage, and nobody likes going into one without a wingman. So the second I heard the air clear, I turned my cruiser around and headed in his direction to back him up. I threw the Crown Vic into gear and headed across Pine Mountain at absolute warp speed. I was listening intently to the radio, catching every update dispatch gave to David as he approached the scene. I was probably 5 miles away, still tearing through the tight curves of the mountain, when David finally arrived at the residence. Then, the air went dead. Dispatch tried to check on his status. Hazard to 425. Hazard to 425. Nothing. Just static. They tried again. Still no answer. If you've never sat in a cruiser, it's hard to explain the sudden, cold pit that drops into your stomach when a partner goes silent on a hot call. The silence hangs in that car like lead. Your mind instantly goes to worst case scenario. Is he fighting? Is he pinned down? Is he able to get to his mic? The time for a measured, safe drive was officially over. I pushed that Crown Vic to its absolute physical limits. My car had been in the shop for some repairs about a week earlier, and I was demanding everything it had left to give. I was practically drifting through the sharp mountain curves, the tires screaming out a continuous, agonizing wail against the blacktop. As I ripped down the final stretch towards the location, a scent drifted through the climate control vents. It was that all too familiar, sharp, metallic stench of baked brakes. But honestly, I didn't care. When your ass is on fire to get to a call, cooked breaks are just part of the cost of doing business. I tore into the driveway of the residence, threw the Crown Vic into park, and just as my boots hit the gravel, the radio crackled to life. It was David. He calmly told Post that all was good. The alleged perpetrator had slipped out the back and left the scene just before he arrived. I stood there by my open door and let out a massive, heavy sigh of relief. Dave was okay. The adrenaline spike started to recede. But as I took a breath, I noticed a small cloud of white smoke lazily floating past my face. Odd, I thought. Must really have cooked those front pads. I started walking toward the house where a man and a woman were standing near the corner of the building. I looked at them, and their eyes were the size of dinner plates. They weren't looking at me, they were looking past me. I paused, looked at their terrified expressions, and asked, "Are you guys okay?" The male didn't say a word. He just slowly raised his hand and pointed a finger back at my cruiser. I turned around. The rear passenger side inner wheel well wasn't just smoking. It was actively, aggressively on fire. Damn! I felt like Doc, Back to the Future. From 0 to 60, the adrenaline is right back at throat level. I ran back to my cruiser, hit the trunk release, and scrambled to grab my dry chemical fire extinguisher. I saw it, grabbed it, ripped the safety pin free, aimed it right at the wheel well, and squeezed the handle. A pathetic, weak little puff of white powder came out, like a birthday candle being blown out. I shook it, slammed the handle again. Nothing. The damn thing was completely dead. Meanwhile, the flames are licking up the quarter panel. I look over at David's cruiser parked a few yards away. Perfect. Dave's got an extinguisher. Sprinted over to his car, grabbed the driver's side door handle, and yanked. Locked. Locked up tight. Standard for Dave. I stood there in the driveway for the classic WTF moment. Of course it's locked. Because why would anything go right when your car is actively trying to incinerate itself? But then a memory sparked through the panic. About a week prior, when my car was in the shop, I'd been driving David's cruiser, and I never gave him back his spare key. I bolted back across the driveway to my smoking car, opened the passenger's door, popped the glove box, and dug through the clutter until my fingers wrapped around that key. I ran back to David's car, shoved the key into the trunk, popped the lock, and looked inside. There was no fire extinguisher in the trunk. I just stared into the empty space. But if you knew David Combs, you knew he was the type of guy to keep things in the most unconventional, random places imaginable. I abandoned the trunk, ran around to the side window, looked inside the cabin, and sure enough, there it was, strapped to his police cage with a strip of Velcro. Why wouldn't it be? I ripped it off the cage, sprinted back to my car where the flames were getting noticeably bigger by the second, pulled the pin, and laid a heavy 5-second stream of fire suppressant all over the back quarter panel and the boiling wheel well. Finally, the flames died out. I stood there, covered in white dust and sweat, coughing, double checking the scorched wheel well to make sure there weren't going to be any more flare ups. Satisfied the crisis was averted, I set the empty extinguisher down on the gravel. I looked over at the couple who had alerted me to the whole ordeal. They were still standing by the house, same look, completely bewildered, watching this Sloan trooper wrestle his own car out of the flames. I wiped my sweat off my forehead, cleared my throat, and said, "Hey, could you do me a favor and just keep an eye on this for a second while I go check on my partner?" They both nodded. I walked into the house, dusting myself off, and made sure Dave had everything handled with the domestic dispute. I gave him a very brief, very humbled synopsis of what had just happened outside. We walked back out to the driveway together. Dave looked at the white powder caked all over my Crown Vic, looked at the charred tire, and then looked at me. He smiled, shook his head, and said, "Damn, 408. You really did burn the tires off of it getting here, didn't you?" I just gave him that wink we always gave each other when the chaos was over, the air was calm, and everyone was safe. Dave had gotten a shiny new cruiser about a year before that. Whenever we got a chance to work together, which was rare, he would usually meet up with me, slide over into his passenger seat, and have me drive his car so I could drive us to the calls. I used to kid him that I had to slow down and wait until I saw his blue lights behind me again before I could speed up. And that was just our way of keeping down their locker room ribbing. He just let me drive. He rode shotgun. My cruiser had more than its fair share of mechanical issues. And every time it was in the shop without fail, Dave would hand me his keys and say, "Here, use mine." He'd had that spare key made specifically for me. And luckily, I kept it in my glove box that day to save my bacon. For generations, state troopers have kept spare keys clipped to the end of what we call our whistle chain, the long brass chain that runs from your right uniform lapel into your front pocket. When I finally retired from the agency and built my shadow box to hang on the wall, I made sure that key to David's car was forever pinned to the end of mine. We lost Dave a few years after he retired. A brain tumor took him from us way too soon. It's the funny things that stay with you over a career. You remember the high-speed adrenaline, the screaming tires, the smell of burning asbestos on Pine Mountain, and the absolute panic of a dead fire extinguisher. But when the smoke finally clears, what you really remember is the brotherhood. Miss you, brother. Thanks for listening to this episode of Into the Gray. I'm DK Hall. I'll see you a little further down the road.